Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to take a look at this trail camera that Gosira sent me to review. Let's open up the box and see what's in here. One more thing before we get started with the camera review. Throughout this video you're going to hear the sound of race cars in the background, and I apologize if that's a little bit distracting. On the day that I filmed most of the footage for this video, there was an unscheduled race at a local NASCAR track that's only a few miles from here, and the sound was carrying a little bit more than I thought it was. So again, I apologize for that background noise through a good part of this video. Looks like we also have a pretty decent instruction manual here. And here's another quick start or simple operation guide, as it's called. Here's the camera itself. We'll set this aside for the moment. So it looks like they also sent along a base that we can screw down to something, and then there is a swivel mount here. Also in the package is a strap to wrap this thing around a pole or a tree or something like that. Here we have a USB to AV cable here with some RCA plugs on it. And here we have a standard USB connection cable with USB-A on one side and USB mini on the other. We have what they call a post-service, or I guess what you'd call a warranty and registration card here. And that's all we have in the box. Before we get started, we're going to need to remove these protective covers from all of the lenses and sensors. Before we dig into the camera and some of its features and operation, I'm going to set up this base. So you can see here this just has some nuts on the end and a lock washer. I'm going to pull off the outer nut and lock washer. I'm just going to put this through this base and then reattach it. And you can see that the base itself has holes in it, so you can screw that down to a piece of wood or a tree or anything that you want to, and have a nice stable, secure, and adjustable base for the camera. Okay, now this being a Chinese manufactured part, everything on here is going to be metric, so I'm going to use this 10mm wrench and just kind of snug things up here. So before we get started using this, let's take a look at the camera. Up here in this window we have all of the infrared lights that are used for night vision and a couple of sensors and indicators here. Here is the main camera lens. This is the central PIR sensor, or person in range sensor, and these are the side sensors down here. Over here on the side you can see we have a couple of snap latches to keep the camera closed and weather tight. So inside the unit you can see that there is a lip on this side and a groove on this side to provide some of that weather resistance we were just talking about. Over here on this side of the unit is the main display screen and all of the controls. And there's even a speaker down here for playing back audio. Down here we have the memory card slot and a USB jack. Over on this side we have a cover that hides the battery compartment, and I always have a little trouble opening these, so I use kind of a key to help open it. And you can see there it holds 8 AA batteries. So having said that, let's go get some batteries and fire this thing up. Before I put the batteries in and fire it up, let's take a look at the back. You can see on the back there are some braces here to mount the straps through, to mount this to a tree or something like that. You can also see that there's a brass threaded camera mount here on the back and one on the bottom, so you have a couple of options for using this camera stand or something similar. As you can see, I've got 8 rechargeable batteries in here, and I'm going to put the cover back on. So next up I'm going to insert this SD card into the camera. Now I'm using a micro SD card in an adapter, and this is a 2 GB card that I happen to have. If you plan on recording video or leaving this out in the field for a while, you may want a card that's a little bigger than 2 GB, but I think for the purposes of this demonstration this will be sufficient. So we'll just insert this down here in the slot, and I think we're ready to turn this on. So let's turn on the camera and go through some of the operation here. So the first thing to note is this on-off switch is actually a 3-position switch. The position it's in now is the off position. There is a center position, which is sort of the setup position, and then the full on position sets the camera up in automatic mode and allows it to start taking pictures on its own. So for now we're going to put this in the middle mode for setup. Okay, so you can see we get a splash screen and then it fires up. The camera is actually active. You may be able to see in the screen behind the glare there that the lens is kind of showing what's behind it. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to push the menu button and go into the setup to begin. Now before I go through the menu options, I'll mention that there is a navigation keypad here. You can see that there are just arrows that we'll use to navigate through the menus, and then an OK button to accept menu selections. These two buttons over here are for manual operation of the camera and video mode. We'll talk about those in a minute. So let's go through some of the menu options. So I'll be using the keypad that's down here out of your vision at the moment to navigate through all of the menus. The first thing that I'm going to do though is push the menu key here to activate the menu. Now you can see the first option is the mode option. So now I'm going to hit the OK button to go into that option. So you can see here in this menu option we have three options. We have a photo mode, a video mode, or photo plus video. What this means is that in automatic mode the camera will either take just photos, just videos, or both. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll go and set it to both. So I'm just going to use the down arrow key to go down to that option, and then I'll hit OK to set that option. So now I'll use the down arrow key to go to the next option, which is photo size. And then I'll hit OK to go into that menu option. So you can see here we have a wide range of options that we can choose from, and you may want to set these lower depending on what size card that you're going to have and how long you plan to leave this unattended. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to set this to the maximum, which is 12 megapixels. So I'm going to scroll down to the next option, which is video size, and similarly you can see that we have various resolutions that we can pick from. Now for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to go up to the maximum resolution, which is 1920 by 1080. So that option may be a little bit of a large size for the 2 gigabyte card that I have in here now, but if you have a larger card, you'll be able to use that. But for the purposes of this demonstration, the videos are going to be short, so I'll leave it at the max option. So the next option that you can see here in the menu is picture number. Now I've had to temporarily set my mode back to picture mode only, as this is not adjustable when you are in photo and video mode. But in picture mode, if you go into this option, you can see that you can choose between 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 9 photos at any given time. So for the purposes of this video, I think I'm going to set it at 3. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to go back to the mode option and set this back to photo plus video, which, as I said before, renders this off, and it sets a predetermined number of photos to be taken. The next option is video length. You can see here that we can adjust the video length in seconds from as short as 10 seconds up to 180 seconds. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave it at 10. So next up is the interval mode, and what that is used for is to set the length of time that the camera pauses between taking photos or videos automatically. So in other words, if the camera detects motion and snaps a photo or video, depending on your settings, this is the amount of time that it'll take for the camera to be triggered again. So in here you can see that we can change the time interval between minutes and seconds, and I'm not sure what the minimum and maximum is here. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to leave it set to 30 seconds. Scrolling down, you can see here this is where we would turn the time lapse on and off. Right now I've got it off, and we're going to leave it off for the first part of this demonstration. The next menu option is to turn the side PIR, or person in range sensors, on or off. Now you can see we can go in and turn them off if needed, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave them on. The next option you can see here is to turn the volume recording on or off. Again, I'm going to leave this on. Here we have an automatic power off of 5 minutes. I'm going to leave that at the default. That's probably a decent amount of time. Next up is the backlight timer, and this is currently set to 1 minute. And what that means is if we left the camera in this mode and didn't touch any buttons or do anything, the backlight of the display would turn off within 1 minute. The next menu item is flashlight. Now what I think this really is a camera flash, meaning if the lighting is a little bit dim, you can have a light flash kind of flash when the picture is taken, sort of like a traditional camera. And if we go into that menu option, you can see that there's an automatic mode, a high and a low. I'm going to leave that on auto. So the next menu item here is the timer. Now you can see by default it's off, but you can turn this on if you want to enable the camera between certain time periods of the day. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave it off. The next menu option is the date and time, and this is where you set the current date and time. You can see by default it's set to 2017 1/1. I'm going to change that by just scrolling up to 2018, and then I'll use the right scroll arrow to go over to the month, and I'm going to move that up to 4, which is the current month, and then I'll move it up to 21, which is the current date. Scrolling to the right one more time gets us to the time. So now first up, I'll set the hour, and I'll just kind of scroll up to 3, and then I'll change the minute down to 30, as that's what time it is, and then I'll scroll over to the right and change this over to PM. Once I've got the time set, I'll just hit OK to return back to the menu. The next menu option is the time format, and we can change between 12 and 24 hour. I'm going to leave it on 12 hour. Next up, we have a timestamp that can be turned on and off. Turning this on enables a timestamp to be added to each photo or video, presumably. I'm going to turn that off. I don't need that. Next up, we can set a camera name, and that's achieved by just using the scroll arrows to change the various letters. You can kind of navigate in there and set a name if you want to. I'm not going to bother with that. Next up, you can set a password. By default, it's off, or you can go ahead and turn that on and then set a password. But again, I'm going to leave that off. The next menu option is to be able to change the language. You can see that there are various options for language. I'm going to leave mine on English. The next option is the TV output mode. Now, by default, this is set to PAL, which is the common standard in Europe and Asia. Here in North America, we typically use NTSC, so I'm going to go ahead and change that, even though I really have no plans to connect this directly to a TV. The next menu option here, called Format, is for formatting the SD card. So I'm going to actually go ahead and do that right now, just to make sure that this card is formatted properly for this camera. Now, if you have any data on a card that you may have inserted in here, this is going to overwrite any of that, so be careful if you're using this option. The next menu option here would be to reset to factory defaults. We're not going to need to do that right now, so I'm not going to click that one. And the last menu option is the system option, and if we go in there, you can see that there are options for updating the firmware or checking the current firmware version. So we're not going to need to update the firmware on this one just yet, so I'm going to scroll down to the version option. I'm going to hit OK, and we'll see what version we have. And there you go. So to get back to the menu, I'll just push the menu button, push it again, and now we are ready to go. Okay, so now that we've gone through all the menus and got everything kind of set up the way that I want to, I'll mention that over here on the right side of the navigation controls, you can see there is a camera button and a video button. And this enables you to use this sort of like a regular camera. So you can see here, if we push the button, it'll actually take a picture. So similarly, if we go down here and hit the video record button, it'll switch modes and then start recording video. And you can see there in the upper right corner, it's actually recording. So in order to stop it, you just hit that button. In order to replay or view anything that the camera has stored on the card, either taken in manual mode by pushing these buttons, or when it's been out in the field recording pictures on its own, we hit the replay button here. So you can see here it's now displaying the last image, or in this case video, that has been taken. So if I hit OK, it will actually start playing back that video that I just shot a minute ago. So in order to stop it, and you probably could hear there through the speaker that it was playing the sound that it recorded as well. So now to review the other items on the card, we just scroll through the up and down arrows to do that. But of course, the only other thing on here at the moment is that one photo that I took. So at this point, now that I've got everything kind of set up the way that I want it set up, let's go put the camera somewhere and test it out in automatic mode. As you can see, I've got the camera mounted to a tree. Now, instead of using the strap that came with it or the other articulating mount, I've decided to use a bungee cord and hook onto the hooks that are behind the camera. So we're out here in the backwoods now, and you can see that I've got the camera mounted to a tree. Now you may also be able to see that I'm using a bungee cord instead of the strap that came with the camera. Now there's nothing wrong with the strap that comes with the camera, it works just fine, but I've found that it's just a little bit quicker and easier to use something like this, a bungee cord. Anyway, let's get the camera set up, turned on, and ready to go. So before we get the camera turned on and ready to start taking pictures, we should be able to test out the aim and that kind of a thing and make sure that the sensors are activating the way that we want them to. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the camera in program mode again by sliding over to the middle position. We'll wait for it to kind of turn on here. And now what we'll do is close it up and latch it, just so it's sort of in its position that it's going to be in when it's in automatic mode. Now you may be able to see that there is a blue light blinking up here, and what that means is that the camera is sensing motion from the main sensor right here, the kind of the straight on sensor. Now when we see the red light flash, that means that it's sensing movement from one of the side sensors. So what that allows us to do is to be able to position the camera where we want, and then just kind of walk around and test the motion detection and make sure it is set up the way that we want. Okay, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it in the video or not, but at the moment I'm over here kind of off to the side of the camera, and you can see the blue light is still flashing, meaning the main sensor is detecting my movement, but now as I move my arms, the red light is also flashing, meaning that the side sensor is kind of catching me from over here. So I can kind of walk around a little bit and determine, you know, where the range of movement is and kind of how far away from the camera it's going to see to determine the best position for the camera. Once I've used the red and blue lights to determine that I've got the camera positioned the way that I want, it's time to turn it on to automatic mode. And the way to do that is to just simply switch it over to the full on mode. And then you'll see over here in the right corner, it'll count down from, I think, 4 or maybe 3 seconds. And once it gets to 0, the camera will start taking pictures or video, depending on how you have it set up, once it detects movement. Okay, so now that it's active, we'll close it up, make sure it's latched to keep out any weather, and we're ready to start waiting for some stuff to trigger it. So now, in case we don't get any wildlife to trigger this thing, I'll kind of walk around back here and let it take some pictures and video of me, and I'll post that. But if we get some wildlife back here over the next day or two, I'll post that instead. If we're really lucky, we'll get the black bear that I saw in my yard last weekend, but I have a feeling that I won't be seeing him for a little while. Next up, here are some sample photos and video that were recorded by the camera. Okay, so let's see how the camera reacted to my movements there just now. And let's also leave it set up for a little while and see if it captures any wild. Next up, let's take a look at a few samples recorded in infrared mode. And you guys can get an example of what it looks like. Probably won't catch too much wildlife out here this time of year, but you never know. We'll leave it set up tonight and see what happens. Early morning twilight here too, just for comparison. So while we're out here, I think what I'm going to do is set up a quick time-lapse test. Now, I don't think we're going to really capture a whole lot of motion out here in the woods. Maybe you'll see the trees go back and forth, but we'll do the demo anyway. To get into setup of the time-lapse mode, I'm going to hit Menu, and I'm going to scroll down to find that option in the menu. Hopefully you can see there with the glare in the background here. So I've gone down to the time-lapse option and it looks like we can't turn it on. So I think I know what's wrong. If we go to the mode option, we've got to set this just to plain photo mode. It can't be on photo and video mode. So we'll do that, and then we'll go back down to the time-lapse mode, and as you can see now, we can turn it on. So now what we'll do is we'll go down to this periodic interval set. And you can see by default, hopefully you can see that, it's set to 30 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that down to something lower just to make sure that we capture something out here. So I've got it set at 5 seconds now, which appears to be the minimum. So I'll say OK to go back to the menu. And then I'll hit the menu button to go back out of the menu. And then we'll slide the switch over to turn the camera back onto automatic mode. And I'll let this run for a little bit and see what we capture. So what you're looking at now are samples of the time-lapse photos that were taken, each being displayed for half a second. That's pretty much going to wrap things up for my review of the Gosira trail camera. If you're interested in learning more about this camera or purchasing one, please use the link down in the video description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. Thanks for watching.